I came from the notary's office. My aunt left me an apartment in the center and a currency account. Quietly approaching the door, I heard, as my husband told my mother, "We'll squeeze everything out of her." Then I decided to first teach a lesson. And before we continue the story, write in the comments what your name is and what city you are from. A piercing wind swung open the doors of the notary's office, as if it was in a hurry to let me out. And I, clutching the folder with documents smelling strongly of fresh printing ink, stepped under the icy drops of a June shower, which at this time the day seemed almost wintry. Inside the folder lay a testamentary will to my aunt emigrant Elena Ivanovna, that same selflessly free woman who for 20 years ago decided to go overseas. Not having held on to a single root in the soil of our city, and now, like a grateful ghost from a past life, left me an apartment on Pokrovka with a view of the cast-iron balconies of an old apartment building and a dollar bill, the amount on which seemed an unreal combination of zeros. Step by step I made my way through the thunder-heated and flashes of lightning water, feeling how the heels are sinking in streams, and the fingers on the hands turned white from the tension. To me, I wanted to scream with delight, call Miron right now, share the miracle, but something intangible can be. The memory of my aunt's short letters, where she warned me about the envy of my neighbors, made me bite my lip and leave phone in his pocket. Drops slid down his hair, stuck to his eyelashes, and every blow thundered like the click of a second hand. Hurry, think, decide. We'll enjoy it at home. We'll share the news together, I told myself, imagining Miron hugging me, his eyes shining with pride for me. My wife's luck, as we circle around the kitchen table where yesterday we were arguing about a painful loan for repairs, and suddenly all worries disappear. I quickened my pace, the folder stuck to my fingers some kind of advertising leaflet, but I didn't notice it. I was completely immersed in the whirlwind of future well-being. When the minibus pulled up, the cabin was full. I stood there, holding on to the slippery handrail, listening to the children in the back. The seat is funny that it's June outside, and people are wrapping up, and I felt a sharp injection. It seemed that my happiness was so great that the city must certainly hug him with me. 5 blocks flew by unnoticed. Near my native entrance I came out, stepping heavily down the steps of the porch, where a wet cat was hiding under the railing. The apartment door was not tightly closed. From inside, Miron's familiar, warm voice could be heard. But there was a strange metallic note in it, as if he was talking to someone he is embarrassed by. I held my breath, tiptoed back, hid behind a column, and I took out my phone. The screen flashed with a low battery notification. And in that blinding moment, I heard every word. Mom, I checked. She doesn't understand anything. She thinks the fish is already on hook. We'll squeeze everything out of her until she comes to her senses. Thunder struck so close that the glass shook and I almost dropped the folder. My heart lashed out with electricity, in my chest as if a torn wound had opened up, goosebumps ran down my arms, and the thought of betrayal rang out like broken dishes. Miron spoke, telling about the connection. I saw his silhouette through the crack, his face bent towards laptop screen, and on the monitor a bright spot of mother sweater. I heard Svetlana Pavlovna's satisfied chuckle. She's a weak mother, she believes every word. The main thing is that she signs now. What do you need? These phrases were gnawing at my ears, leaving an aftertaste of bitter rusty iron. With shaking fingers I bent the folder folded, as if trying to hide the treasure deeper. The room swam before eyes, my knees weakened. I wanted to throw open the door and throw thunderous reproaches at my husband. How dare you? A slight tremor in my chest stopped me. A picture flashed in my head. Our first evening, when Miron approached me in the bookstore, he timidly asked, "Which novel by Remarque?" "I will recommend it." And how then we walked along the embankment for hours, and the drizzling fog hid our hands until they didn't intertwine. I remembered Svetlana Pavlovna's generous compliments for my borscht, her advice on where to buy inexpensive fabric curtains, and a spacious smile Miron, when I transferred him part of the funds to open the workshop. Everything now seemed to be covered in a web of lies. Who am I to them? A cash cow, the heroine of a naive novel. I closed my eyes and counted to 5. I felt my heels digging into the wet rug in front of the door. I had to hold on. You must not let your heart break through to your voice. You must think, not destroy everything with one hand. Scream. After all, a gift to an aunt can become not a chain, but a key. I inhaled the sharp smell rain, smoothed her hair, straightened her back, as if putting an invisible blanket on her shoulder's armor, and quietly pushed the door. I made my steps louder than usual so that Miron managed to close the video and return to the usual mask. The hallway smelled of coffee. He always cooked it after dinner while he worked from home. I took off my coat, turned to the mirror, wiping away the smudged mascara with a palm, and smiled like an actress about to go on stage. Miron appeared from the living room. The phone has already disappeared. There is a kind surprise on his face. "Kira, you are all wet. How did it go at the bank?" A slight tilt of the head, a gentle tone, a diamond edge of deception. I lowered my eyes, pretending that nothing was bothering her. She slowly replied, "The usual hustle and bustle, cue, some technical delays." It was just in vain that I got soaked through. My heart is all it was still pounding, but I heard my own voice, even and slightly tired, like a rehearsal in the mirror. Miron covered me towel, barely touching his shoulders, and offered hot tea. While he was fussing, I slipped into our bedroom, where a wooden box, a gift from my grandmother, lay in the secretary. Inside, under a velvet, the substrate was emptiness. I decided that it was there, in the very depths of our family memory. I will hide the documents. I carefully wrapped the will and the extract from the accounts file, added them to the box, as if it were an old love letter, and returned them to their place. On my cheek the reflection flashed a pale mask of tolerance. In the evening, when the rain died down to the rustle of drops, I sat on the edge of the sofa, took a mug of black tea and casually said, "You know, we have there are layoffs at work now. They say several projects may be closed. I'm honestly worried that to go under the knife." I watched as a shadow flashed across Miron's face, followed by a quick sympathy, taut as a string. "Kira, don't worry, everything will work out. I will support you. You." He touched my hand, and at that moment I saw the other one in the side reflection TV, crawl to the phone on the table. He dialed something, turning to the side kitchen, and I caught a quiet messenger notification. I'm sure he was writing to his mother. The pain of betrayal flared up again, but I forced myself to exhale and look at the clock. From the radio on the old romance, "The Night is Bright," was playing on the windowsill, and a soft female voice was drowning in rustle of drops outside the window. This song always reminded me of trust, as a child I clung to my aunt and believed that the world was kind. Now the novel has taken its toll, fragile fabric that someone else's fingers tear. I got up, took the mug, smiled at her husband. "I need to do some work. The report is burning." And she disappeared into the office. There, behind the closed door, she put a sheet of paper on the table, took out a pen and began to write down her thoughts. First, keep quiet about the inheritance. Second, find out the legal subtleties. Third, observe. List came out shorter than pain, but clearer than tears. A dull splash of thunder reminded of the power of nature. Even the strongest walls can shake if a storm hits decides to break through. Later, when Miron went to bed, I crept into the kitchen, turned off light, sat down by the window and listened to the water slowly flowing down the glass. On the screen, Svetlana and Miron were having a conversation on the phone. She believed him. Yes, Mom, like a child. Soon everything will be ours. I took a screenshot, hid it in a hidden folder and slowly closed my eyes. Her image appeared before me. A well-groomed woman with a practiced smile, my mother-in-law, who called me daughter and treated me to jam. Now this jam seemed mercury. At 3 a.m. I went to the secretary, opened the box, and with my fingers carving flowers and patterns, as if life promised a happy garden. I looked at the signature of my aunt, even letters. First, a lesson, I whispered, closing the lid, and the click of the lock echoed with a quiet chord of determination. The morning began with cloying silence. Miron was still asleep, and I, covered with a beige blanket, sat on edge of the sofa and reread an email from an IT guy I knew who the evening before he prepared a neat PDF for me, a certificate, a forecast about the upcoming layoff of engineers at the company where I work. According to official data, had been working for 7 years already. Inside the document, logos, digital signatures, subclauses of the order, as if torn from office hell, and highlighted in red phrase, forced release of an employee. The certificate looked so it is plausible that an unpleasant shudder began to play within me. If life suddenly laughed and declared a real crisis, I would probably be no less scared. But it was on this threatening paper that my legend about debts. It was this that was supposed to sow in Myron a sense of urgency, and at the same time to awaken the predator in him, which, as I already knew, was hiding behind the beautiful shell of a caring husband. For now the coffee machine sighed and clicked, I thought about how difficult it was for me to play the role of the victim. After all, every one of my the smile for him now became a crooked mirror reflecting his own greed. Finally, in the kitchen Miron appeared, his hair disheveled. He had a phone in his hand. I put the tablet down, pretended to check the news and quietly said, "We need to talk." Lowering her cup, he squeezed out worried something happened, and I, not giving myself the right to friend of the voice, handed him a printed copy of the certificate, having crumpled the corner in advance to make the document look more used. Miron quickly ran his eyes over the text, and I saw how his pupils narrowed. Then they widened, how he bit his lip, feigning sympathy. "Kira, this is nightmare, are you sure?" His voice rang with a measured balance of panic and support. However, the hand holding the paper was shaking slightly. Not from sympathy, I was sure, and because hasty calculations were being born in my head. I nodded, adding, "I could be laid off in 2 weeks. Looks like I'll have to find a new one place. And for now, credit, insurance, all that." The air between us thickened, as if raw clay. And when I looked away, Miron came closer, stroked my shoulders and whispered that we would cope. But his fingers were tense, like the strings of a guitar on a limit. In the evening I caught him, thinking that I had buried myself in a detective story and was already I fall asleep. I opened the browser on my laptop, workstation, and entered in the search bar. Urgent redemption of apartments inheritance without intermediaries. The heart jumped. I squinted through the crack between his eyelashes. He browsed forums, agency directories, investor chats. I saved contacts several times, copied them onto a piece of paper. The screen reflected blue glare on his face. And in these glare I seemed to see a merciless cold sea. Lying in the darkness, I mentally repeated the steps of my plan: to observe, fix, keep calm. The next day I called Lisa. The younger, my sister, lived in a neighboring area in a tiny studio with hanging light bulbs on wires. She hid windowsill behind the pots with succulents and believed that any family ailments can be cured with laughter. Having met her in a small cafe, where the windows were covered with steam, I told the same story, but without the faucet, because Lisa was the only island where I could be real. Lisa listened without interrupting. Only when I mentioned Miron and Svetlana's words, she quietly said, "Kira, to be a servant easier than a wife with rights. Don't give them the upper hand." We sat side by side, and I remembered our childhood, how Lisa hid my diaries under her pillow so that my mother wouldn't see the CS, how I led her hand across the yard when the neighborhood boys teased us. Now I wanted to hide Lisa in a glass ball from that mud that she would have to roll around in herself. Lisa brought more honey than sugar in her tea, hugged me and whispered as if she herself had grown older. "Don't believe anything one of their compliments. Check each signature." That's when I decided that I will hide the original documents with the notary of Lisa's friend and additionally certify them with a power of attorney. Our laughing remarks about the durability of stamps and varnish seals mixed with the smell caramel armor. This light contrast was needed to imprint itself in the memory, as a promise of a quiet future. That same evening, a family dinner awaited me at mother-in-law. We sat at a glossy shell table under the even light of the hanging lamps, and Svetlana Pavlovna, dressed in freshly ironed silk, began each phrase from the gentle Korochka, but in her pupils sparkled the squint of a bird of prey. She asked about my department, about the rumors that were going around about the layoffs, and I, doing pretending to be a slave, she answered, "Yes, you are right, there are rumors, but for now nothing can be done to say exactly." Between the plates of rolls and olives, I caught her long look at my wedding ring. Not the stone, but the metal, as if she measured the strength of the chain. Miron smiled, brought wine from the table, repeated, "Mom, everything will be fine," but a harsh note of hidden impatience surfaced when he spoke too quickly. Each of the remark was like a move in a chess game, where pawns disguise themselves as kings, and the Real king keeps changing places with the jester. On the third day after the certificate, Miron, returning from the office, suggested an idea to save the family budget, to take out a small loan of 1,000 for €3 in order to stake a claim share in his friend's startup. He spoke quickly, waving his arms, and assured that the investment is packed with a tax break, and asked for my guarantee, temporary for a couple of months until he withdraws the shares. I nodded as if I hadn't noticed how he pushes me to the edge of the abyss, and gently asked to send all the contracts by mail. At night, I sorted them out together with Pyotr Drozdov, an old friend and lawyer who loved hot paprika and ambiguous jokes, but in legal matters schemes were not mistaken. We were sitting in his office with a panoramic window, and Peter, checking the codes, offered a trap. I must agree to the guarantee, but in the clause on execution indicate the installment plan, dependent on monthly confirmation of my income, and also set conditions, that any default on the loan invalidates all of Miron's paid transactions for the last 6 months. So tie the pike's hand so the Crucian carp can breathe, he grinned. I thanked and felt how the inner glacier was taking shape, becoming smooth. Calculating. A week later, my legend took another route. I asked neighbor Realtor to Maffei, who often smoked on the balcony and listened to Miron and me argue over expired payments. Call Svetlana on behalf of the Russian Chambers Agency and offer a unique lot, an elite dacha on the Shore Lake Valley. Timofey, the chameleon man, took up the role with passion and already in the evening told that some energetic lady requested a full virtual tour and copies documents. I guessed that it was Svetlana. Already on the next morning, Timofey sent a screenshot. The translation surfaced in Miron's SBP translations about the mother. Exactly the deposit of the dream task. The amount, although decent, was still smaller than my currency account, but big enough to make Svetlana's eyes light up. I made copies extracts, added to the files and felt a chill of relief. Now I had proof of her involvement. The web tightened, and I made sure that the thread did not break prematurely. Over time, Lisa increasingly sent me Rathweiler's audio message, which she was temporarily working as a volunteer. The dog growled, slapped its tail on the floor, as if I was anticipating a fight. These funny roars raised my spirits. But in another diplomatic front was brewing at the mother-in-law's house. Svetlana called and invited us to a Saturday dinner without a reason, adding honey syrup of disposition to the voice. I immediately wrote to Lisa. I think they are going to give a big go. Sister sent a dagger emoticon. I'm going to Kujenu got ready as a spy. She put on a light grey dress without flashy jewelry, put a voice recorder in her handbag, a keychain to record the words about the gifted dacha. We arrived at 7. 4 clouds were gathering outside the window, and the spider chandelier illuminated the table with porcelain plates. Svetlana, like a glass figure, advised me to put more baked duck on my plate, because it was unknown how you have worked there. I answered politely, and my eyes slid to Miron. He was a taut rope, ready to strike. When the plates were empty, I folded my arm's chin, quietly said, The HR lady warned me that I could be fired already in a month. If that happens, we'll be behind on our mortgage. I think we'll have to tighten our belts. Svetlana raised her eyebrows theatrically. Korochka, I'm worried that if money is needed, Miron will always find a way out. And Miron, having taken the bait request, leaned forward. His eyes sparkled, and he uttered the phrase that I was waiting for the bank not to sell the apartment to a collector. Let's register it in my name temporarily until better times. I slowly put the glass down and silently looked at him, then turned her gaze to Svetlana. In her wrinkles near her lips, I read the prepared satisfaction. It took me a second to let go of impotent anger and let your voice sound even. You need to think. After all, the apartment is family property. Miron nodded and pretended that respects doubts, but immediately inserted. Then at least sign the power of attorney, and I will quickly resolve all bureaucratic issues without you. You need a rest now. His arguments fell like a house of cards. In slow motion. I'll sign a little, and that's it, and I'll feel better. I'll sign a little, and I'm terribly in debt. I'll just sign it and he won't even touch the account. I inserted phrase bait. And if I don't find a job for 6 months? And I saw how Svetlana squeezed napkin. She immediately intervened, sweetly handed it over. Kira dear, of course you will find it. You are talented. But for now their duet of voices filled the room with persistent exhortations. I let them talk, memorized intonation, and she remembered Lisa with her scary, but in some sense funny Rottweiler. The dog growls, but the chain is strong. When the dessert was pushed away, I stood up, thanked for dinner, kissed Svetlana on the cheek. Her lips were cold as metal, and, putting on coat, said, I agree to tighten my belts, but it is too early to rush. The loan I was talking about Miron may be able to be restructured. We'll come back to the issue in a week. Svetlana raised her eyebrows. Miron bit his tongue. I, smiling, added, Thank you for your support. We walked out into the night. The heavy air smelled of electricity. Thunderstorms. In the car, Miron was silent, his fingers tapping on the steering wheel. I listened as a favorite romance quietly rustles through the speakers, now becoming my hidden anthem Invisible War. Peter's phrase was spinning in my head. Don't be a fish in someone else's pond, build your own. At home, Miron went to bed, and I sat in the office by the light. Table lamp, looking at a stack of fake and real documents, my yellow marker marks, screenshot of account statements. I smoothed them with my fingers' pages, smiled bitterly. Every step in this web of deception turned red thread leading to the denouement. At midnight, a notification popped up in the bank's app. Svetlana Pavlovna, funds received 200. This was roughly the task I had set. I touched the screen and whispered, "It's time to turn the mirrors inside out." When a thin web of lies envelops space, the only weapon becomes a mirror surface. This is what Pyotr Drozdov said. Growing in front, I have a pile of new documents in my office overlooking the maples, where the morning the light painted the glass with yellow groves. A week after the family dinner, I chose the time when Miron left to meet with a startup partner and went to Peter and the notary in the neighboring House of Justice, hiding under a wide-brimmed hat and a solid folder. The three of us sat by a massive oak table. The notary, a stately lady named Elena Sergeevna, filled out the contract form in precise calligraphy. Life trust with reverse annuity, and I felt like each grove of feathers flies off a flake of anxiety. The scheme was simple in theory, but graceful in practice. The property is my original property, but is managed Lisa as the title owner. All income from possible rent, sale, and even compensations are automatically transferred to me, and I can cancel any transaction on my own. At the same time, the Rosregister reflects that Kira A is the sole beneficiary. A stone lock mechanism is provided. No third party without my notarized consent will not move the walls even a centimeter. Alyona Sergeevna, having finished, gave out excitedly, "Sign here and here." Peter added his signature as the custodian of the documents and, carefully folding them papers into a fireproof safe, turned the key with a dry crack. The sound reminded me of a blow the judge's hammer confirming the verdict. We nodded to each other. Front documented, walls reinforced. Now you can unfold the mirrors. When I got home, I put on a little show. Miron appeared in the hallway in 8 p.m. with a gift of chrysanthemums in paper and a bottle of Chilean claret, clearly believing that any female anxiety can be tamed by strong alcohol. I greeted him not with a formulaic smile, but with fussy meticulousness. I pulled him out from behind washing machine lost envelope with points of my old Toyota Auris and confident announced in a tone that I was going to the car market tomorrow. Miron froze. Raised an eyebrow. Why? I hesitated, then sighed rehearsedly. I have to pay off the loan. I don't want the neighbors to be scared by the collectors. He tried to object, saying, the car, my comfort, my shield from the weather, but I smile, offering grapes and cheese, and I say that walking is good for you, but I think to myself, let him feel why I'm selling property, supposedly for his own well-being. The next day, while he was pretending work meeting, I actually sold the car to a reseller, deliberately underpricing it so that the deal looked forced. She put the cash in an envelope and took it to the same bank where she kept the secret currency bill. Cassia folded the bills with tags. Her head was barely visible from behind the monitor, and when the amount shone on the screen, I felt a pleasant heaviness. My mirrors become thicker. I left a dry stamp in the statement for Miron. The entire amount was gone to pay off the debt. However, the real check was in a separate folder of the pattern. The scan is already handed over to Peter. For several days in a row, I teased Miron with vague explanations. The reseller gave less than I expected. The bank took a commission, and the less money was left in sight, the more impatience was evident in his movements. He kept looking at me more and more often. Phone, check the incoming, waited for calls from the bank. I, while relaxing in the evening on the couch, deliberately looking through websites about moving to the province to be with relatives, so that he thought I was looking for a backup airfield. The tension was growing, and I needed respite. I was walking along the embankment on Saturday morning when I accidentally saw a poster-charity exhibition Rukopapia. Volunteers of the Protection Fund invited to shelter outside the city. Bus with the inscription "For Good." Already collected passengers. I sat down. Spontaneity sometimes brings the most accurate truth. In the shelter, where cages with puppies and kittens lined up like little barracks of hope, it smelled of sawdust, medicine, and dampness. There I met a tiny grey kitten with a white spot near its nose. His name was Roy, and his gaze was wise, as if he had already managed to see winter outside the window. While the volunteer was talking about vaccination, I stroked Roy's fur and remembered the summer when Lisa and I hid the homeless cat Bars from my mother, and Bars responded to us with unconditional love. Then for the first time we understood that the life we had saved creates a feeling inside that can't be bought. I hugged Roy to my chest, and at that for a moment, through the muffled squeaks of the puppies, I realized that I was finally not obliged. There is no one left to save but yourself. A toxic marriage is like a chain of cells. No matter how much you feed him, you won't be able to go outside until you open the door. I filled out the guardianship form. In 2 weeks after the vaccination, Roy will move in with me. The heart beat for the first time in months of planning warm, not anxious. I return home in the evening to find Maron in office with the desk lamp on. He didn't expect me to come in quietly, and in the beam light saw his hands cuddle some leaf. A shadow fell on his face, but his eyes were shining with triumph. I walked in. He turned around sharply and shoved the piece of paper into the desk drawer. With the instinct of a scout, I noted the corner of the yellowish copy, very similar to the edge wills. I asked neutrally, "Did something happen?" He gave a forced smile. "Yes, just like that, checking the bills." I nodded, taking a step back, and offered tea. That night I did not slept. I felt that he had found a piece of my secret, but he didn't even suspect that a will without annexure number 3 of the trust is legally dead. However, he thought otherwise. I heard him call his mother in the morning. He was being cautious, but it made sense to grab her. "Easy. Mom, I have the paper," enough to persuade her. "Prepare the realtor." Day rapidly pressed to the sharp outline. A couple of hours later, Maron came up, not hiding business enthusiasm. "Kira, I have great news. One friend investor looking for an apartment in the center without intermediaries." I told about ours. "I'm ready to offer a deposit next week. What do you say?" She raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by his speed, and slowly replied, "Let Heel come, we'll show him, maybe we'll get lucky." Maron seemed to be momentarily stunned by the ease of my agreement, then he lit up. "Let's have a small buffet, create an atmosphere." I nodded, and inside I felt Peter's quiet laughter. Give a rogue a rope, and he'll weave a noose out of it. He set a date. Friday 7 p.m. Svetlana called in an hour, dropping the words, "A wonderful opportunity. Like you, Karochka." I agreed happily. "Of course, Mommy. Come, I will note your participation." Maron, I was sure that I had won, found evidence, found a buyer, and my wife voluntarily showed the objects. What could be doubts about your own invulnerability? The following days I carefully arranged mirrors. On Thursday I brought Roy from a shelter, who was discharged early. The little lump was hiding in my scarf, and its purring sounded like a song in a storm. I gave the kitten to Lisa for a day. "Hold my amulet. It will come in handy." Lisa laughed and promised to bring it in the morning along with fresh eclairs. Then I arranged a lighthouse in the living room, took a couple of photos of ours from the wall wedding dance, replacing them with abstract landscapes, where there are more lines than shapes. Let the apartment look more expensive and more distantly, as if for a deal. This disoriented Myron. He asked, "Isn't it too empty?" I answered, "I want to make the space more profitable." He nodded approvingly. Profitability was his favorite word. It was Friday. The morning was freezing. Clear. Hundreds of sun fragments were scattered on the kitchen glass, as if the sky itself polished my mirror weapon. Lisa arrived first with a box that smelled chocolate. The swarm was purring peacefully in the carrier. Together we set the table with light appetizers, canapes with rosé beef, cheese plate, grapes, mini eclairs. The clearing was cooling in a transparent bucket. I changed into a deep emerald dress, gathered her hair into a smooth bun, elegant indifference, as a signal for those who think I'm broken. Maron, noticing my appearance, almost beamed. His wife seemed to be preparing to present herself as a merchandise. This pleased his vanity to the point of trembling. The telephone rang to 107. Intercom. First came Svetlana and the realtor, a woman with a briefcase and a sharp smile. A foreign buyer followed, introducing himself as Walter. I knew to fee hired a German actor who had long collaborated on commercial shoots. Maron introduced everyone in a cheerful bass voice, feeling like the conductor of a profitable deal. I, like the diligent hostess, offered drinks and casually talked about the charms of the neighborhood. Step to the theater, New Line Metro, the bar association across the street. All the little things. So that in the eyes of a potential buyer, and in reality in Maron's eyes, the apartment sparkled like a diamond. Realtor voiced price slightly below market value to close the deal quickly. Miron nodded with a broad smile. Deadlines are important to us, of course. Walter listened, clicking away with his phone camera, as if he was already mentally arranging the furniture. At some point, Svetlana, raising her glass, she said tenderly, "Korochka, thank you for finding the strength in yourself. Let go of the memories of this apartment." I answered, looking straight into her eyes. Sometimes, to see the truth, need to take a step back. The words slid like a cold drop along the spine. Svetlana fleetingly trembled. Foam splashed in the glass. Miron noticed and hurried to switch attention, suggesting to walk through the rooms. He walked ahead with his auditor's card, indicating how one partition can be demolished, how the layout can be changed. I walked next to Walter, and when Miron turned away, the actor quietly said, "Everything is according to plan, Fräulein." My heart sank ribs with relief. The examination was over. We returned to the table. Miron raised his smartphone solemnly. "Well then, I'll record the advance." Svetlana blinked her eyelashes. The realtor was already unfolding the deposit form. I put glass, straightened up and said, "Just a second, I want to make a toast." The guests froze. I took a crystal glass, tapped it with a spoon, and in the silence it sounded. For those who knows how to trust mirrors, they don't lie. I took a sip of wine, smiled and added, "By the way, a courier will bring the documents for the apartment now. Without them, the deal is impossible." Miron darkened, but quickly pulled himself together. "Of course, you're right. Let him bring it." I saw him seething at my calmness, but he couldn't turn it down. Hours they were showing 1945. I knew that in 15 minutes the notary, a friend of the appraiser, will rise, but this will be the story of the next part. Now it was important to record their confidence in victory. The guests laughed, clicked glasses, and I looked at the reflection of the scene in the buffet mirror. In it, as if in a dark lake, the fragile line of my shoulder shone through next to Svetlana's haughty profile, with Miron's delighted eyes and Walter's camera movement. They all seemed like dolls in a doll's house, and I an old puppeteer who was about to pull the main string. When the 10th toast died down, I gently apologized, went out loggia, where Lisa left the carrier. Roy, having climbed out, began to purr, touched with the nose of my palm. The street lights lit up his eyes with amber sparks. I stroked the kitten and whispered, "You will show your essence yourself." Morning Friday, promised by Myron as the day of the great sale, began with a light rain, like a whisper, which knocked along the windowsill and dissolved into a light hiss, reminding me of that first downpour when I was returning from the notary offices. I got up before everyone else, aired the rooms, covered the furniture with thin transparent film, as if she was preparing expensive exhibits for display, and put them a wine cooler with 2 bottles of champagne on a marble counter. The wet walls of the bucket dripped down like beads drops, and each drop rang before tasting. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the hallway was already hung Lisa's emerald coat, which had arrived under the guise of a trusted translator for a foreign buyer. Roy, recently the owner of the living room, having settled in, hid under the armchair and watched the bustle of the wide with open amber eyes. At 11 o'clock Myron arrived, dressed in a grey suit that seemed presentable, if not for his overly hasty movements. He nervously lifted the hem of his jacket, as if was afraid that the contract might fall out of his inside pocket. Svetlana, following her son, smelled of expensive perfume. Her fingers, for rings and a sparkling bracelet, rhythmically tapped on the clutch, revealing the hidden impatience. The realtor Marina, already familiar to us with her sharp chin, entered after them, and the foreign buyer Walter in a beige raincoat. On top of all this motley, at 11:30 another guest, an elegant man in glasses, rose from the procession, whom Miron introduced him as a friend, the appraiser Ivan Sergeevich, but in fact it was our notary ally, the very same one that I was drawing up a trust management agreement. I greeted everyone with one phrase, merging the words into a measured stream. "Friends, thank you for finding time to come on such a rainy day. Let the drops outside the window remind you that great luck is often born in a storm." Then I began pouring the champagne, and in the thin crystal the bubbles exploded like little fireworks, erasing the boundary between the first shower of hope and that final foam of revelation. The guests dispersed around the living room. Svetlana took a place near the window to control the view and insert pegs and comments. Relta laid out a folder with preliminary inspection reports. Walter pretended to check the angle of incidence of light. And Lisa stood next to me and translated. Davaknink für Klischandchen Assesignitalize, repeating German words with such a clever accent that even Miron momentarily was proud of his relative's professionalism. At some point, Ivan Sergeyevich asked Miron, "Please show me the technical passport of the apartment so that I can immediately enter the cadastral data into the assessment sheet." And Miron, beaming, took out of his briefcase that same half-empty photocopy of the will, confident that this was enough. I didn't object. I just watched as Ivan Sergeyevich glanced at the first page and held back a smile as he put the paper back. The decisive hour was moving forward. Smoothly, the hands of the clock touched 12. I asked everyone to go to table, where neat stacks of papers lay. Some were real contracts with wet seals, drawn up in Lisa's name as the owner with the right of reverse trust management. Others chewed props that were supposed to distract Miron until the last minute. When everyone we sat down, I raised my glass and, without separating my remark from the general flow of phrases, said, "Before we sign, I want the appraiser to read out the main points so that everyone present understands the details of the transaction. Transparency more important than speed." Miron immediately, getting ahead of me, interjected, "Yes, of course." Transparency is the main guarantee of trust, while pushing Realtor towards the folder with the preliminary agreement purchase and sale. But Ivan Sergeyevich was already unfolding his folder. The crunch of leather, the click of a clasp, the faint aroma of office glue as he pulled out the plump original document, on the cover of which the seal in red wax shone like a small midday sun. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began measuredly, "according to the registered agreement number 27824 dated June 6th of the current year, object real estate, located at the address, belongs to citizen Lisa Alexeyevna by means of title. However, the beneficiary and sole beneficiary is the citizen Kira Alexeyevna." The words settled in the room like thick warm honey. I watched as Svetlana, frowning, she slowly lowered her glass as Myron hung over the table, waiting the usual hoarse sound of triumph, but instead he met silence. Ivan Sergeyevich continued, "Any transactions with the property are possible only with personal notarial consent. Beneficiary, that is, Kira Alexeyevna, and also in the presence of a decision of the Board of Trustees, which includes lawyer Pyotr Drozdov. Thus, dear investor Walter, if you are really interested, you should contact these people." However, he paused dramatically, adjusted his glasses. "As of today, the object is marked a sign of non-transferable property for a period until the end of the trust management, the termination of which can only happen upon the personal application of Lisa Alexeyevna, the beneficiary of Kira Alexeyevna and the notary guardian." Walter nodded, as if surprised but not shocked. His role was exactly that. Miron pushed himself away from the chair, trying to keep face, and, beginning the sentence, broke into a hoarse half-whisper. "Wait, this is some mistake. You should look at my document." He took out a Xerox, unfolded it, but the paper was shaking. Ivan Sergeyevich looked at the copy with a sympathetic, skeptical expression and noticed that a document without appendices and certified pages is legally null and void, and therefore does not confirm ownership. Svetlana straightened up. Her bracelet jingled on the edge of the table, and she, mixing reproach and a commanding tone, pounced. "Kira, what did you arrange it? We just wanted to help you get out of debt." I replied evenly, without letting go of his cup from the stack. "Svetlana Pavlovna, your translations from Miron's accounts on your personal account already speak of more than help. I don't mind support, but not at the cost of her own property." At this point, Lisa, holding the translation notebook, she tapped her pencil and showed everyone that she was recording every word. Ivan Sergeyevich, meanwhile, put the final point. In accordance with the Civil Code of the Russian Federation Articles 104 to 16, given conditions burden the object. Therefore, any attempt to alienate without the consent of the beneficiary is automatically cancelled. Myron sank back into his chair. His fingers were shaking. His face was as pale as if the rod had been pulled out from inside. It still moved by inertia. "Oh well, then. How about a temporary lease?" But my voice trembled treacherously. I softly smiled. "Rent. Great idea. Just keep in mind, the rent payments are also coming into my account. They will arrange it." The tension in the room hung thick, like thundercloud. The realtor coughed, hiding her embarrassment. Svetlana lost her temper. Before her son. She stood up, pointing at me with a sharp, whetstone-like finger. With a sparkling ring, and quickly, almost in one breath, brought down a stream of accusations, mixing accusations of betrayal, greed, ingratitude. She claimed that I had crippled the Dream families, because from the very beginning they only wanted to provide for our future, and now we are left with nothing because of your manipulations. I listened to the panic pain of losing control in her voice, and decided not to shout back, "Calm down, my mirror." When her tirade ran out, I still sitting, she transferred 2 million rubles. From Miron Pavlovich to Svetlana Pavlovna. Deposit for an elite dacha. The date of the transfer coincides with the day of the bad news about my alleged dismissal. Next. Order Realtor Services for urgent redemption. Your call to the hotline. I have a recording. Miron's request to collector Aofin Trust about meeting on Monday to put pressure on me to speed up the collection. All by you signed, everything is documented. I put printouts of screenshots from messengers, bank statements on the table. And each photo fell like pebbles, embedding their words in concrete. Svetlana choked. Miron tried to say, this is a hypothesis, but his voice sounded empty. At that moment the intercom rang. I knew exactly who was standing in front of the door. An employee of that very same findover whom Miron invited to put pressure on me, but to whom I had sent the message the day before the originals of the surety agreements, documents that I signed only partially, including my legal trap. I went up to the panel and said, "Yes, come up." A minute later, a tall man in a grey coat entered the living room. Strictly, but nodded politely and introduced himself. Collector, Executor Krupin Andrei Sergeyevich. He handed Miron notification. Your debt on loan H458 activated. Restructuring cancelled. You are obliged within 24 hours provide a repayment plan. Personal property is subject to seizure as collateral for the debt. Property of the borrower and the guarantor Svetlana Pavlovna. Svetlana gasped. Miron tried to object, but we agreed. But Krupin remained unperturbed. You yourself cancelled the deferment, saying you're going to have a big deal. The deal is strong. He looked around the room. I recorded the situation and asked about the registration number of Miron's car to impose an encumbrance. I thought the moment was perfect. The car keys were in the hallway next to the Zant. Miron rushed to the door, but Lisa flashed first. She deftly took the keys out of the side pocket of his coat and, as if by chance, handed them to Krupin. Svetlana was rushing about, shaking his head. This is outrageous. But the collector filled out the form, invited witnesses, whom he was waiting on the landing, and declared the procedure begun. Mirror, addressed to the traders, showed them a reflection of their own greed, and no words could hide it cracks on Myron's face, where a mixture of anger and horror spread like shadows under his eyes. 15 minutes later a tow truck drove into the yard. Through the window you could see the crane slowly lifted Myron's expensive black sedan. The cables tightened, the wheels helplessly spun in the air, as if fish pulled out of the water. Miron rushed to the balcony, threw up his hands, trying to explain something to the officer in the orange vest, but he just nodded at Krupin's documents. I watched this scene, as in the final scene of the play, every detail exactly matched the director's plan. Inside me, there was delight, or rather deep satisfaction, that the world had finally aligned itself with the axis of justice. When the collector left, the realtor sheepishly collected the folder, muttering that later we'll contact. Svetlana cried silently, burying her face in a napkin. Miron sat, head in hands. Walter said goodbye strictly formally. Estatmia Sirleaf. But, it looks like the deal is impossible. He bowed slightly to Lisa, nodded gracefully to me and left the apartment, having played his role to the end. Ivan Sergeyevich silently handed me a copy of the act of attempted illegal alienation and, placing his hand on his heart in a gesture of silent support, he followed. The apartment became quiet, only Svetlana's rare sobs cut the air, but that there was silence after the storm, no time for it. I took my phone, turned on the voice recorder and said, I am recording the end of the business meeting. The participants have been informed of the legal status of the property. Then she turned to Miron. You know the documents for the loan. All your signatures, yours and Svetlana Pavlovna's guarantees. We will also send the invoice for the examination. Raised a dull gaze. You destroyed everything. I put an end to it. No, I protected what that belongs to me, and you destroyed it yourself with your greed. Lisa touched my elbow, whispered, It's time. Together we got the carrier with the swarm from under the table, and the kitten meowed softly, as if confirming, the plan is fulfilled. Svetlana, I wanted to rush to the door after him, but Lisa got ahead of me, slamming it shut right in front of me mother-in-law's nose. The lock clicked, as if putting a seal, and Svetlana remained inside. Son and a tangle of debts. We went out into the hallway, where it smelled of fresh varnish. The neighbors painted the doors. Lisa winked, holding the carrier, and asked, "Well, what, home?" I nodded. The elevator arrived quickly. We went down to the courtyard, walked past the tow truck that was already taking the car to the impound lot, and headed to the parked car-sharing vehicle. When we pulled up to my new entrance, my aunt's old house on Pokrovka, a light drizzle began rain. Thin needles of water melted as they collided with the warm air. We went up to the 4th floor. I turned the key in the new old lock, letting in a light smell of fresh paint and not yet dried varnish on the parquet boards. Lisa came in and slowly closed the door behind us. Double-checking the bolts. She set the carrier on the floor. Roy made the first step, exploring an unfamiliar space with the dignity of a little explorer. I walked to the balcony with its wrought iron railings, opened the doors and breathed in the noise of the main street. The sounds of the tram, the ringing of a bell, the rustling of tires on wet asphalt, the distant laughter of students who were probably celebrating the beginning summer. A lightness spread through my chest, as if a bird had been sitting in my cage all this time. And now she straightened out wings. I looked back. Lisa had already crouched down, petting Roy. The kitten purred. A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating their silhouettes. "Thank you," I said. Eliza looked up, smiling with understanding without words. For with his back to the apartment, left behind a closed door on the other side of town, anger was sure to seethe, but it was like distant thunder that could no longer reach me. Behind the door their screams died down, and inside I finally felt quiet. I woke up early Sunday morning to a warm cat's nose poking my cheek, and for a moment I didn't realize where I was. High ceilings, the delicate aroma of freshly painted walls and the muffled hum outside the window, they were creating a new sound card, which had not yet become dear. The first thing I did was put the coffee on a small stove to brew, and in the meantime the first bubbles were born. I went out onto the balcony. The wet paving stones glistened under rays of the thin sun and passers-by, covered with umbrellas. They walked faster usual, as if they were afraid of being late for their own dream. The remnants of yesterday's tension still tightened the lining of the soul, but with each passing minute the hand stroking Roy's velvet back convinced me. Everything, what is left behind, cannot penetrate here unless I open the door. Lisa spent the night on a fold-out sofa in the next room. The pillow was crumpled, as if she was tossing and turning, worried about my peace of mind. Soon she appeared. Stretching. Even her good morning sounded like a security confirmation code. Over breakfast we made a list of things to do next. Change the lock on the mailbox, register Roy with veterinarian, connect to the internet, and after 2 days visit a lawyer to file a claim divorce. I officially caught my reflection in the buffet mirror. My eyes were all they were still shining from the shock they had experienced, but rather from the delight of the open prospect. We sat down on the floor. Having laid out the documents, Lisa, like a logistician, marked them in red stickers with dates of visits. I'm blue. Phone numbers of contact persons. Miron for these he called 20 times in a day. I saw the missed calls, but decided to answer later, when the emotions subside. In fact, he was already standing on the edge of a financial abyss, and any answer I give now would only be a prop for his fall. Let him realize the consequences without crutches. At lunchtime we went down to the yard. 2 movers were unloading a dark cherry-colored sofa book from a van, ordered by Aunt Elena, but never delivered during her lifetime. I showed receipt. The movers carried the furniture up the narrow stairs, leaving a dusty echo on the steps. As I followed them up, I thought, oh, Aunt, how she, leaving for America, wrote that someday our city will become her home, albeit through the hands of her niece. Lisa was struck by the quality of the sofa. The carved armrests, as if forged in the Art Nouveau style. We installed it by the huge window, and the room immediately filled with the subtle scent of mahogany. Roy climbed up back, confident in the status of the owner. In the afternoon, I decided to walk along the surrounding area to remember new routes, a bakery with pies, a drugstore around the corner from the bookstore where the exhibition was New Drama. Lisa stayed home to put a temporary tag on the mailbox and fill out an online application for the internet. Coming out onto the noisy boulevard, I heard behind back quick steps and almost painfully shuddered. Instinct still pushed off from any sharp sound. But it turned out to be Timofey Realtor, whose conspiratorial nod said, "Half the agencies are discussing your plan." It was fantastic. He briefly reported that Svetlana had already sent angry letters to 3 large firms with complaints, but their lawyers would respond to her quoting those very articles of the Civil Code. Frankly delighted, He wished her luck and disappeared in the crowd. I felt a slight warmth in my chest. The world was building a network of invisible but benevolent witnesses for me. When I returned, I found an orchestra of meowing and guitar strumming. Lisa, apparently, she found her aunt's old acoustics in the closet and was now trying to fix the top of the Vichy, and Roy was singing along in her own way. We laughed until we cried, remembering our childhood. Laughter is the best crack filler. On Monday, Lisa and I came to see Pyotr Drozdov. The lawyer greeted us with fresh croissants, as if the office was a coffee shop. His friendliness is another armor. He brought a stack of papers, a statement of claim for divorce, an inventory of the jointly pressed goods. There was essentially almost nothing there. Miron registered the property in his and his mother's names. And now the petition for recognizing the marriage as toxic due to financial manipulation. Peter grinned. So that the judge wouldn't, I was thinking, we will attach a screenshot of your conversations and call records. I also did the same with the collector talked. He is ready to confirm the pressure. I signed each page, as if cutting off an invisible tentacle. After official amateur therapy, we went out to the roof of the panoramic terrace, the three of us. And Peter, holding out a small flashlight, said, "Celebrating the completion of the first stage." I didn't understand how the flashlight could celebrate until he turned it on. The beam cut through the daylight and highlighted a huge garland of city flags, which, it turns out, was being installed for a summer festival. It seemed as if all the roads of the world formed a multicolored dome above my head. It was a hint. Now my world open in any direction. That same evening I finally took Miron's call. The voice was strangled, like a missed chord. "Kira, we can talk." He begged to meet, offered to end it amicably. There was a hint of hope in his words to soften the blow, maybe, to return at least some of the influence. I listened evenly, then answered that the only platform for conversation is the courtroom. I wish him strength and honesty, and hung up. Immediately after that, Svetlana called Lisa. The number was hidden, but the voice is recognizable to the ringing. "You still remain a little girl. Don't poke your nose into adult matters." Lisa smiled and said politely, almost velvety, she said in a voice, "Adults are the ones who take responsibility." "Sorry, you have the wrong number," she said and hung up. Next week I formalized guardianship of Roy, the vet issued a passport, and on the way Lisa and I bought a blue gang collar for home. At home I gave myself a ritual of a new chapter. I took out onto the balcony an old cardboard box in which the wedding invitations, the bride's dried bouquet and a disc with a video recording of the celebration. I didn't tear up the cards and throw them away trash. I carefully folded everything and handed it to Lisa. "Burn it at the dacha or leave it in the attic, but I don't need it anymore." She nodded seriously, as one accepts a sacred relic that must be released. No sorrow awakened within me. There was a strange peace, as if the death of an old illusion had finally been set at a certain date. Meanwhile, an official paper from the bank arrived. "Dear Kira A. We inform you that the balance on your currency account." The numbers shone like a real lifeline. I called the manager and asked the question I had been thinking about, whether I could open a grant for a local shelter. The manager with happily agreed to register a charitable subaccount. So my aunt's gift turned into not only my new start, but also the potential to save dozens of swarms. When I told about this Lisa, she hugged me. "You turn pain into bridges, not walls." The days flew by. The trial was scheduled for 3 weeks, and Peter assured me that he would handle the case himself, and that recommends rest and detox from worries. He suggested a weekend tour to a small town by Lake Nera. There is silence, salt winds from the swamp and boats, sliding along the surface. Lisa took the kitten on herself. I packed my backpack, zipped it up lightning, feeling a slight anticipation. The journey turned out to be therapy. I sat on a wooden pier, listening to the waves quietly drumming on the piles and time after time catching myself thinking that my heart finally knocks evenly, without jumps. In a small museum at the monastery I stumbled upon an exhibition of 15th century letters. Calligraphic lines about love seemed so sincere, as if history also wanted to remind, trust exists when it is kept. They exploited. When I returned, I found Roy, who had grown in 4 days. His paws stretched out, his gaze became more cunning. Lisa reported the news. Collectors found Svetlana's third account. Now he's under arrest too. It seems she's trying to blame Miron for being on time. Didn't warn me. I sighed. Let them deal with their mirrors themselves now. The task is to move on. On the threshold of the third week of August, I opened an envelope received from a notary, which contained a letter to his aunt, dated 2 years earlier, but delivered only after the inheritance was transferred. In it she wrote, "Dear Kira, you will have to choose whether you see the ground under your feet or only those who are ready to dig it out from under your heels. Remember, love is when you rejoice for another, and not when you calculate percentages. If there is someone nearby who wants a percentage, show him the door or the mirror." I read these lines and felt that I was carrying on myself an ancient veil of female experience, not only my own, but everyone's. Women who had to defend their right to be the master of their own lives. I put the letter in the new secretary, on the top shelf, where the documents for the apartment and the veterinary certificate now stood side by side. Roy's passport, 2 certificates of different types of care. On the eve of the trial, Miron sent the last message. "I'm sorry. I was blinded. I was afraid of the future." I read these words and suddenly realized that I can really forgive, but that doesn't mean giving back. I answered briefly, "Let each of us be honest with ourselves. This is the best way forward." A little later came the formal from his lawyer. They agree with the settlement agreement and waive their claims. The legal marriage ended more quietly than it began. On the day the decision was announced, I put on a light grey pantsuit, without hiding her face behind makeup. In the courtroom corridor there was a cool smell of metal and paper. Miron sat opposite with his head down. His shoulders seemed no longer so wide. Svetlana did not come. When the judge read the final formulation, I felt not joy, but a light, almost physical emptiness. As if the last page of the old chapter. Peter shook his hand. Lisa squeezed my forearm. We went out onto street, and there, in the morning air, hung a special aroma. Night rain evaporated, mixing with the hot asphalt. I inhaled and realized that there is not even a hint of the former fear in this freshness. In the fall, I opened the Grant Bridges Hopes. The first part of the funds went to the capital repairs of the shelter where the swarm was found. The second part went to the program psychological support for women who have fallen into financial dependence on their partners. Lisa supervised educational block. Peter conducted legal seminars. At the opening of the new, we cut the ribbon at the shelter's building. Little children rushed to iron dogs. Journalists took pictures. And in one frame, the swarm, already grown up, was sitting at my feet, like a guard, shining with silver wool. Sometimes on the balcony in my aunt's old apartment I put on vinyl with romances in the evenings, the same one that sounded on rainy days, and I listened to the city horns dying down. The noise of the streets turns into a homogeneous, almost velvety rustling sound, under which the kitten settles down in a ball at my feet, and I am writing a new chapter. Sometimes it's about the shelter's business plan. Sometimes it's a paragraph about how important it is put mirrors on people on time. In the past, I let them grind uncontrollably my trust. Now I hold the frame and the viewing angle myself. Miron once sent a postcard without words, just a winter landscape with a lonely man walking on the ice. I left it in the drawer as a reminder of where the absence of love leads. One day in the morning, when October had just begun to color the maples in the Polar Palace, I witnessed a paradox. On the steps of the entrance, 2 cats were sharing an old newspaper for rest. One gave in another part of the sheet, and both lay down peacefully. I grinned. In the world of resources a lot, greed only creates the illusion of scarcity. I entered the house, slammed the door, and a soft echo rolled through the lobby. Outside the door, the alien noise died down, and inside me, as always, it was quiet now.